Could a woman who was thrown out of wealthy homes every single day one day become the owner of the biggest business in her village? Can injustice bury a person? Or can it turn them into a strength no one ever saw coming? What happened to karma will make everyone rethink what failure and success truly mean. The sun rose slowly behind the green hills as the village came to life. Roosters crowed in the distance, the smell of burning firewood drifted through the air. Women walked along the dirt paths with water containers balanced on their heads. The homes were simple, built from mud and stone, separated by narrow, dusty roads. At the heart of the village was a small marketplace that buzzed with activity every morning. On the edge of the village stood a tiny hut that looked as if it could collapse at any moment. That was where Karma lived. She was 32 years old with deep brown skin, large expressive eyes that hid years of quiet sorrow, and tightly curled black hair, always wrapped beneath a faded piece of cloth. She woke up before anyone else. She lit the fire, cooked a small pot of porridge, then gently woke her young son Lubilo, who had just turned 8. The boy suffered from a chest condition that made every breath heavy whenever he put in even the slightest effort. It wasn't life-threatening, but it required treatment that Karma simply couldn't afford. She smiled at him while hiding the fear inside her heart. "Eat well, my little hero. When I get back, I'll bring you something you'll love." The boy managed a weak smile. "You don't have to work so hard, Mom." She gently rested her hand on his head. "I'll work hard today, Tai, so you can rest tomorrow." She stepped out of the hut carrying a bucket, a worn cleaning cloth, and a few basic cleaning supplies. She made a living cleaning the homes of wealthy families. Each house paid her for a day's work. Sometimes, they paid her nothing at all. The largest house in the village belonged to a man named Thabo, a man in his 50s. He owned most of the farmland surrounding the village, and everyone feared him. Karma entered the house without a word. She started with the floors, then the windows, then the courtyard. She worked quickly, as though she were racing against time itself. A few moments later, Thabo's wife, Zanele, walked in. She glanced at the floor, then suddenly shouted, "Is this what you call clean?" Karma turned around, surprised. "I just finished," Zanele cut her off sharply. "Look at all this dust." Karma stepped closer. She couldn't see a single speck, but she didn't argue. She answered quietly, "I'll clean it again." A mocking smile spread across Zanele's face. "You don't get it, the problem isn't the dust." She raised her voice so every servant nearby could hear. "The problem is that you're completely useless." Several people standing nearby laughed. Karma felt her face grow hot with humiliation. But she kept working, she needed the money, and she couldn't afford to talk back. On her way home, she ran into her closest friend, Nomsa. They had known each other since childhood, they had never been apart. Nomsa gently grabbed her arm. "Why do you keep putting up with this?" Karma smiled. "Because Lubilo needs his medicine." Nomsa lowered her head. "One day, they'll regret everything they've done." Karma let out a soft laugh. "I'll be happy if today simply ends in peace." Nomsa hugged her tightly, but behind that quiet smile, something else was beginning to grow, something Karma herself couldn't see. The next morning, she went to another house, then another, and everywhere she went, she heard the same words. "Hurry up. Do it again? You're too slow. You don't deserve this paycheck." She swallowed every insult, then returned home exhausted. Even so, no one knew the secret she carried. Every night, after her son had fallen asleep, she sat beside a small oil lamp and pulled out old sheets of paper she had collected from the trash. She sketched ideas, wrote down numbers, calculated expenses. For years, she had dreamed of creating a business that would bring the village's women together to turn the crops wasted after every harvest into preserved and dried food products that could be sold to neighboring villages instead of being left to rot in the fields. She didn't know how to begin, but she believed with all her heart that the idea could change the future of the entire village. Every single night she whispered to herself, "If the opportunity ever comes, I won't let it slip away." Several weeks later, an unexpected announcement reached the village. The village council called everyone together. An elderly village elder stepped forward and said, "We've received a proposal from a development foundation. They will fund one project, and only one. The project that creates the greatest number of jobs." Silence swept through the crowd. Then whispers began to spread. Everyone started dreaming, but Karma, she felt as though her heart might leap out of her chest. This was the opportunity she had been waiting for all these years. She ran all the way home, pulled out her old papers, brushed the dust off them, and spent the entire night organizing her ideas until dawn. The next morning, she was the very first person standing outside the council office. But the moment she walked inside, one of the council members looked at her with open contempt. "You?" For the first time in a long time, she answered with complete confidence. "Yes, I have a project." The man took the papers without the slightest interest. He flipped through the pages in a matter of seconds, then slammed them down on the table. And who's supposed to believe that a house cleaner knows anything about running a business? Karma met his eyes without flinching. The value of an idea isn't determined by the person holding it. The room burst into laughter. Another man sneered, "Go back to cleaning houses. This place isn't for people like you." She walked out feeling as though the ground beneath her feet was giving way, but she didn't tear up her papers. Instead, she pressed them tightly against her chest and whispered, "I will never give up." Karma walked out of the council building feeling as though their words weighed more than stone. It wasn't the first time she had been humiliated, but it was the first time her dream itself had been humiliated. She stopped beneath a large tree at the edge of the square and pulled out her papers once again. She stared at them for a long time. She almost tore them apart. Then she remembered Lubilo's face as he coughed through the night. Carefully, she folded the papers and placed them back inside her bag. She whispered to herself, "If they close one door, I'll build another." That evening, Nomsa came to her hut carrying a small sack of corn. Smiling, she said, "I brought this for Lubilo." The little boy's face lit up with joy while Karma sat beside Nomsa and told her everything that had happened at the council meeting. Nomsa listened carefully before saying, "If they're rejecting you because you're standing alone, bring the women together. When they see the whole village standing with you, they'll have no choice but to listen." The idea sparked something inside Karma's mind. The very next day, she began going from house to house. She knocked on one door after another. "I want us to build something together." But most of the women politely turned her away. And who's going to stand up to Thabo? If the wealthy families get angry, we'll all lose our jobs. It's a beautiful dream, but it's impossible. By the end of the day, only 2 women had agreed to join her. Even so, Karma smiled. Every mighty tree begins as a single seed. Thabo wasn't pleased. He had been watching everything. He called his wife Zanele and said, "If that woman succeeds, people will stop working for us." A sly smile spread across Zanele's face. "Leave it to me." A few days later, Karma was cleaning another home. Without warning, a scream echoed through the house. "My gold necklace is gone!" Everyone rushed into the room. The search began immediately. Then Zanele, who happened to be visiting the homeowner, spoke loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Search Karma's bag." Karma's eyes widened. "I didn't steal anything." But someone grabbed her bag before she could stop them. They opened it, a gold necklace fell onto the floor. The room went silent. Karma felt as though the air had vanished around her. She stared at the necklace, then whispered, "That's not mine." But no one believed her. The homeowner shouted, "Get out of my house!" Another man yelled, "Thief!" The accusation spread through the village faster than wildfire. Within 2 days, every door had closed in her face. No one would hire her anymore. Even the women who had agreed to join her project backed out, terrified of what people would say. Karma sat outside her hut as the sun disappeared below the horizon. Inside the house, there was nothing left except a handful of flour. And Lubilo's coughing had grown worse. The boy looked at her with tired eyes. "Mom, are we going to eat tomorrow?" She smiled through her tears. "God willing, we will." She walked back inside the hut, and for the first time in years, she cried. Not because she was hungry, not because she had been falsely accused, but because she felt her dream collapsing right in front of her eyes. The next day, she sold the last valuable thing she owned, an old bracelet her mother had left her. With the money, she bought medicine for Lubilo and a little food. When she returned home, she found an elderly man sitting outside her hut. His name was Mozi. Years earlier, he had managed one of the largest crop storage facilities in the region before retiring. He looked at her calmly. "I heard what happened." She lowered her eyes. "Everyone has?" The old man reached into his bag and pulled out one of her project papers. She froze. "Where did you get that?" He smiled. "I found it lying near the council building the day you walked out." She gave him a sad smile. It's over. He slowly shook his head. No, that's just beginning. He sat beside her, then pointed at the drawings. This idea, if it's done right, could change the future of this village. Karma slowly lifted her head. For the first time, someone was reading her idea instead of judging her poverty. Mozi continued, "The problem isn't your project. The problem is that you're trying to build a mansion without laying a foundation first." She looked at him. "So what should I do?" He answered, "Start small." From that day forward, Karma became his student. Every morning she went to see Mozi. He taught her how to preserve crops, how to calculate profits, how to negotiate, how to manage inventory, and how to turn losses into opportunities. He shared everything he knew. Every night, she put those lessons into practice. She began producing small batches of dried food products inside her tiny hut. Then she took them to a neighboring village to sell, where no one knew who she was. The surprise, every single product sold out within hours. She returned home carrying the first real profit she had ever earned in her life. It wasn't much, but it was the first money she had earned with her dignity intact. Months passed. Little by little, her profits continued to grow. She bought a few simple tools, then rented an abandoned storage building on the edge of the village, and hired the first two women who had believed in her dream. She always told them, "I won't be the boss. We'll succeed together." Before long, her products became well known in the neighboring villages. For the first time, some of the wealthy families began asking, "Who's behind these products?" But no one expected the answer to be Karma. Then one morning, a large truck pulled up to the warehouse carrying the biggest order the business had received since it began. Karma stood there watching it, her eyes filling with tears. Her dream was finally within reach. But what she didn't know was that the person she trusted more than anyone else was at that very moment selling every secret of her business for money. Karma stood in front of the delivery truck, smiling without fear for the first time in years. She wasn't looking at a shipment of goods. She was looking at years of humiliation transformed into proof that every sacrifice had been worth it. She walked over to the workers and said, "Double check every count. I don't want a single box leaving here without being recorded." The two women who had believed in her from the very beginning smiled back. They looked at her with pride. On the other side of the village, Thabo watched everything from the window of his house. His face darkened. "That woman is growing faster than I expected." Zanele looked at him. "What are we going to do?" He answered coldly, "We won't bring her down from the outside. We'll destroy her from within." That night, Nomsa sat inside Thabo's house. It wasn't her first visit. She sat quietly with her eyes lowered. Thabo placed a heavy bag of cash on the table. "You know everything about her?" Nomsa's hands trembled. "She's my friend." A cold smile crossed Thabo's face. "She was your friend when you were both poor." Then he pushed the bag toward her. "But now, she's about to become richer than you." Silence filled the room. Then he added, "Help us, and I'll make sure you have a new home and enough land to take care of you for the rest of your life." Nomsa stared at the money for a long time. Life had been cruel to her. Her husband was gone, she was drowning in debt. She tried to resist, but her fear of poverty was stronger than her conscience. Slowly, she reached out and took the bag. From that day on, the betrayal began in silence. Nomsa visited the warehouse every day. She laughed with Karma, helped her with the work, and quietly memorized everything. The names of the merchants, the selling prices, the shipping schedules. Then every night, she reported every detail to Thabo. Thabo wasted no time. He hired workers, bought equipment, and copied Karma's entire business model. Then he went one step further. He started selling the same products at lower prices. Within weeks, merchants began canceling their orders. In a single day alone, 3 major shipments were cancelled. The workers stood silently inside the warehouse. Boxes were stacked from floor to ceiling, but no one was buying. Karma felt it in her gut. Something wasn't right. She turned to Mozi. "Someone knows every move we make." The old man looked at her carefully. "And that someone is very close to you." The losses continued to grow. Karma was forced to sell some of her equipment just to pay her workers. One of the women said, "Don't pay us this month." Karma immediately shook her head. "I won't let anyone go hungry because of me." She sold the few belongings she still owned, just to make sure none of the women working for her went to bed without food. One night, Lubilo's coughing became much worse. He struggled to breathe. Karma picked him up in her arms and ran to the village's small health clinic. The doctor examined him carefully, then looked at her with sadness. He should have started a new course of treatment weeks ago. Her voice trembled. How much will it cost? The doctor named the amount. Karma felt the world spin around her. That money was everything she had left. It was meant to cover her workers' wages and buy the raw materials for the next production cycle. She left the clinic carrying her son. He had fallen asleep from exhaustion. She looked up at the sky, then whispered, "Lord, please don't make me choose between my son and my dream." The next morning, she made a decision that no one else knew about. She paid for Lobelo's treatment in full, then returned to the warehouse. She never told the workers that the company's cash reserve was almost gone. She smiled whenever she stood in front of them, then cried alone at night. A few days later, a young employee came running into the warehouse, completely out of breath. Someone's outside trying to convince the women to quit. Karma hurried outside. She saw one of Thabo's men speaking to the workers. "Come work for us, we'll pay you twice as much." Several of the women exchanged uncertain glances. Poverty was relentless, and the offer was tempting. Then the very first woman who had believed in Karma's dream stepped forward. "When none of us had work, Karma fed our children." She looked the man straight in the eye. "Loyalty isn't for sale." The man walked away furious. But Karma understood something in that moment. The war had truly begun. What she didn't know was that the next blow wouldn't come from Thabo. It would come from the person she had always considered a sister. That night, Karma couldn't sleep. She sat alone inside the small warehouse, surrounded by boxes that no longer seemed to have a destination. Her accounting ledger lay open in front of her. The numbers told the story. Losses were rising, orders were disappearing. But what hurt the most was not knowing where the attacks were coming from. She rested her hand on the ledger and whispered, "I fought poverty. I fought people's judgment. But how do I fight someone who smiles at me every single day?" The next morning, Karma went to see Mosey. The old man was sitting beneath his usual tree. One look at her face was enough. He knew something had changed. He asked quietly, "So, you've discovered the truth, haven't you?" She looked at him in confusion. "What truth?" He let out a slow sigh. The greatest danger in a person's life isn't an enemy. It's the one who knows exactly where to place the knife. Karma was silent for a moment. Then she said, "I suspect Nomsa." The silence that followed felt heavy. Even saying her name hurt. Mosey slowly nodded. "Do you have proof?" She lowered her eyes. "No." He answered calmly. "Then don't let your pain make you wrong someone, the same way you were wronged." Those words planted doubt in her heart. She didn't want to believe it, not because she was naive, but because she truly loved Nomsa like family. That same day, Karma went to Nomsa's house without telling her. When she arrived, she saw Nomsa talking to one of Thabo's men. She quietly hid behind the wall. Then she heard words that made her entire body freeze. The man said, "Thabo is pleased with you. You told him everything." Nomsa replied, "When will I get the rest of the money?" The ground seemed to disappear beneath Karma's feet. She couldn't bear to hear another word. She simply turned around and walked away. Every beautiful memory they had ever shared suddenly became painful. The day Nomsa had stood beside her, the nights they spent talking about their dreams, every memory now led to one heartbreaking question. How could she do this? That evening, Karma confronted her. She walked into Nomsa's house. Her friend greeted her with a warm smile, as if nothing had happened. But the moment she saw Karma's face, the smile vanished. Karma spoke in a voice so calm it was frightening. "Since when?" Nomsa said nothing. Karma repeated, "Since when have you been selling every secret I trusted you with?" Tears filled Nomsa's eyes. "Karma," she cut her off. "Don't say my name, not like you're still my friend." Nomsa's voice became barely a whisper. "I didn't have a choice." Karma let out a painful laugh. "That's what every traitor says." Suddenly Nomsa shouted, "You don't know what I've been through." Karma fell silent. Nomsa continued, "You were always strong. Everyone believed you'd make it someday. But me? I was terrified I'd die poor, just like I was born." Karma stepped closer. "You could have asked me for help." Nomsa broke down in tears. "I was jealous of you." Those words cut deeper than any confession ever could. Karma turned around and walked away. She didn't scream, she didn't seek revenge, but something inside her had shattered forever. That night, She made a decision. She wouldn't just build a business, she would build a system that couldn't be destroyed by the betrayal of one person. The next morning, she shocked everyone. She closed the warehouse. The villagers immediately assumed she had given up. Rumors spread like wildfire. Karma is finished. The wealthy families won. Her dream was bigger than she was. But the truth was very different. Karma was working in silence. With Mosey's help, she began designing an entirely new approach. She realized the biggest weakness in her business was relying on only a handful of merchants, so she decided to change everything. Instead of selling through one or two traders, she would build her own distribution network. 1 month later, something happened that no one expected. Karma reopened the warehouse, but this time it wasn't just a warehouse. She had purchased an abandoned piece of land on the edge of the village, and construction had already begun on something much bigger. A place where women could work together, a place to store crops, a place to train young women with valuable skills. Someone asked her, "After everything you lost, where did you get the money?" She smiled. "I sold everything I own, but I never sold my dream." The news reached Thabo. He was furious. She failed once, and she'll fail again. But what he didn't realize was that Karma was no longer the woman who had been thrown out of people's homes. She had learned the rules of the game. Months passed, the new project officially opened for business. It was many times larger than the original one. Women from across the village came to work with her. Her products began reaching distant markets. Even the people who had once laughed at her now stood outside her doors asking for jobs. But Karma had forgotten nothing, especially not the night. She learned that the person closest to her had been the reason she almost lost everything. Then came the grand opening. The entire village gathered together. Everyone wanted to see the place that had become the pride of the region. The village elder stepped onto the stage and announced, "Today we celebrate the opening of the largest project this village has ever seen." The crowd erupted in applause. Then a man carrying a thick file stepped forward. The moment Karma saw him, the smile faded from her face. He was one of the officials from the Development Foundation that had rejected her proposal in the beginning. He looked at the crowd and said, "Before we celebrate, there is something everyone deserves to know." Silence fell over the gathering. He opened the file, then said, "The real reason Karma's proposal was rejected in the beginning had nothing to do with the quality of her idea." Every eye turned toward him. The original documents she submitted were altered before they ever reached the council. Karma's eyes widened. For the first time, the whole truth was finally beginning to surface, but the revelation that would change everything was waiting on the very last page of that file. The official slowly opened the last page of the file. Every eye in the village was fixed on him. Even Thabo, who had been standing confidently among the crowd, felt the color drain from his face. The man spoke. Years ago, when Karma submitted her proposal for the first time, the council never received the complete file. People exchanged confused glances. Then he continued. The pages explaining the business model and the projected profits had been removed. Whispers swept through the crowd. The village elder stepped forward. "And who did it?" The official lifted his eyes toward the gathering. "We have proof." He paused. The person who took those pages from the council office was working for Thabo. The crowd slowly turned toward Thabo. He shouted in anger, "Lies!" But the official calmly pulled out another document. "And these financial records prove he was paid to do it." Silence. For the first time, Thabo had nothing to say. Karma stood frozen where she was. She wasn't as joyful as everyone expected. She looked at the man who had tried to bury her dream years ago, yet she couldn't feel complete victory, because she remembered the nights she cried alone, the days Lubilo lay sick in bed, the days she had been forced to sell the last thing her mother had left her. Mosey walked over and quietly said, "You've won, Karma." She looked at him, then answered softly, "I won the business, but I lost so much along the way." After the truth came out, Thabo tried to leave the village, but the villagers stopped him. Karma never asked for revenge. She never demanded that he be imprisoned. Instead, she stood before everyone and said, "His greatest punishment is living long enough to watch the woman he tried to destroy become the reason this village now thrives." Her words carried more weight than any sentence a court could have handed down. As for Nomsa, she stood alone in the distance. Ever since the truth had come to light, she hadn't found the courage to come near Karma. But after the celebration ended, she finally walked over. Her eyes were filled with regret. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness." Karma remained silent. Nomsa continued. I thought money would solve all my problems. Instead, it cost me the only person who ever truly stood by me. Karma looked at her for a long time. Part of her wanted to be angry, to scream, to let every wound speak. But then she remembered something. She hadn't become strong because she carried hatred. She had become strong because she let it go. Finally, she said, I forgive you, Tha, but I'll never forget. Nomsa broke down in tears. Those words weighed heavier than any revenge ever could. Years passed, and the village was transformed. The abandoned place where Karma had started her tiny business became the largest production center in the region. Hundreds of women found work there. Young girls learned valuable skills. Families that had once struggled to survive finally had a steady source of income. Karma was no longer the woman who walked into wealthy homes to clean them. She had become the woman people lined up outside to ask for work. But success came with a price. One day, Lubilo, now a young man, stood beside his mother during the opening of a new building for the growing business. He smiled and said, Mom, do you remember when you used to tell me you'd make our lives better? She smiled back. I do. He looked at her proudly. You kept your promise? Karma looked into her son's eyes. Then tears quietly filled her own. Because she knew the truth. During those long years of struggle, she had completely neglected her own health. She had worked day and night. She had carried burdens no one should ever have to carry. And after years of success, her body finally demanded its price. The illness had been silently growing inside her. No one knew, not even the people closest to her. On the final day of the celebration honoring the project, Karma stood before the people of the village. She wore the same kind of simple clothes she had always worn. She had never dressed like the wealthy. She looked at the crowd and said, I used to believe success meant hearing people applaud for you. She paused. But I've learned that real success is creating a path for those who come after you. The crowd listened in complete silence. Then she added, Never let poverty convince you that you're worth less than anyone else, and never let someone else's rejection define your future. Those were the last words she ever spoke to the village. A few months later, a grand ceremony was held to honor Karma's legacy, but she wasn't there. Lubilo stood on the stage instead. In his hands was a letter his mother had written. He unfolded it and began to read. If you're hearing these words, it means I couldn't be with you today. The entire crowd fell silent. But don't be sad because I lived a life I never imagined was possible. I was once a woman who cleaned other people's homes, and today I've become the reason so many homes can keep their doors open. I lost a friend, I lost years of rest, and I lost my health. But I never lost myself. And that is the greatest victory of all. The years went by. Yet Karma's name never faded from the village, not because she became the richest woman there, not because she defeated those who had wronged her, but because she proved one simple truth. A person may be denied opportunities, they may be humiliated, they may fall all the way to the bottom, but as long as they never lose faith in their ability to rise again, no one can ever steal their future.